I would like to welcome all our participants in our fourth session of the MC2CM Targeted City Actions webinar series. Today we have a special session. It's MC2CM's contribution to global agendas. Before we start with our session, I would like to give, as usual, a couple of guidelines about this webinar. إن كنتم تريدون سماع الترجمة باللغة العربية الرجاء الضغط على رمز الكرة الأرضية في أسفل الشاشة واختيار اللغة الروسية. And if you have any questions about, for the presenters, would you please write it in the chat box or in the Q&A box, and the presenters will address your questions at the end of the session. Also, if you would like to unmute yourself and take the turn to ask your question, please raise the virtual hand that you can find next to your name in the participants list, and we will give you the turn to ask. Thank you, Lamine. Today we have Lamine Abbad, the MC2CM project manager at ICMPD, and Fatima Fernandez, the project officer at UCLG. Hello, Fatima. Hello, Lamine. And thank you for being with us today. The project team will take us today more into details about how the MC2CM is contributing to a global agendas such as the Global Compact on Migration and Sustainable Development Goals. Lamine, would you please give us an overview of the SDGs and their main areas and principles?
Thank you, Fatima. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on which side of the Mediterranean you are. Yeah, could you maybe pass the slide? I would like to start maybe just by recalling what are one of the main global agendas that we I think all are working and concerned about, which is the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, maybe better known under the SDG name. I don't see the slide turning.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing maybe that is important to recall. I think we have an issue with the slides.
Lamine, can you see the slides? I'm moving them.
No, it's not turning now.
Okay, would you like to share your screen maybe?
Yes, no problem.
That would be easier.
I will share my screen directly. I would need the person that is sharing to stop sharing. So, do you see well the slide now?
Well, it is not in the presentation view.
Okay, I will try, however.
Yeah, now it is.
Yes, that's challenging for me because my notes are not appearing on my screen now. Indeed, however, let's go forward. One thing that maybe it's important to recall is that the Sustainable Development Goals are constituted by 17 goals and 169 targets. That's an agenda that has been adopted by the United Nations and the member states of the United Nations in 2015, and that aim to be implemented by 2030, 10 years from now, 5 years passed already. One thing also that we need to highlight is that 60% of the targets that appears in the SDGs can only be achieved at the local level, which doesn't mean only by local authorities, but only at local level with the different partners, stakeholders, NGOs, but also directly by the inhabitants of the territories. The goal, the SDG is based on 5 thematic areas. You can see here on the graph that the 17 SDGs are basically divided into 5 thematics. People, that's to tackle in particular hunger and inequalities, with a big focus on what would be the a big focus on the dignity of the people, also on what is regarding the planet. Maybe in our case, when we talk about migration, is not the most relevant thematic area, even if there are issues in particularly linked to climate change that we know are already affecting migration flows and will probably affect even more in the future. At the moment, I think that most of the effects of the climate change are leading to internal displacement, but we also know that in the future that may have a bigger impact at the international level also. There is the prosperity dimension, which links in particular also to the social, cultural and economic aspects, the peace, which is fundamental, and the partnership, because the partnership is one of the key elements of the SDGs. Without this partnership, the agenda is not possible. It is not possible to implement the agenda. Also, 8 principles are guiding the 17 goals. So it is based on the experience, because this agenda is coming from the Millennium Development Goals. So it is the lesson learned that are trying to be implemented. The MDGs did their part of work, but there was also some issues. There was in the definition, in the implementation of the MDGs, and actually the 2030 agenda is trying to fill this gap that was remaining. A multidimensional approach. I think that's what I was mentioning with the topic of the partnership, and that's also something that we find in the integral nature, is that you have to tackle the SDGs are 17. We have 17 goals, but these 17 goals can be tackled separately. Basically, you work most of the time on several of these goals at the same time, and we'll see it a bit later with the targeted action, the way that they are all of them tackling several of these SDGs, leave no one behind. And I think this is a particularly relevant for MC2CM. The 2030 agenda is really focusing on the poorest people, on the most vulnerable. And there is a great highlight in all the goals to also in particular support these categories. Global in nature, meaning that no country, no stakeholder can tackle this alone. You can't come and say, I will solve the SDGs. That's not true. The SDGs is global challenges, and we are all concerned wherever we are in the world, and that's also the universality of it. It's not only for developing country or developed countries, and maybe one of the big differences with the MDGs, where in the MDGs, the Millennium Goals were more taught toward the developing country. Here, the SDGs are universal. Everywhere in the world, all countries, all stakeholders have the same interest to tackle these SDGs. I said before, it is integral in nature, means that there is a total interconnection between the goals, between the stakeholders and the countries. It's not something that you tackle only from the civil society, that you tackle only one SDG done by the state, another one done by the local level. No, everybody needs to work on all the dimension. Inclusive, which means that all level of governments, all level of the society needs to be involved, and measurable. I think that's also a key, a very important aspect. The SDG has been taught with indicators, with the monitoring system, because if you want to advance, you need to be able to measure your achievements, to draw lessons, and then in the future to make the needed modification to reach your targets. So I think that's a very important concept. colleagues from UCLG maybe later can tell us a word on the indicators. There is a lot of debate on this, and the indicators are sometimes not that easy or not that adapted at the local level, but it is a really big step to have an agenda that is taught already with the evaluation part. When we come, so that was just a framework on the 20, a reminder, I would say, because I think most of our colleagues listening to us already have had the chance to hear about it and probably are working on the SDGs already. Now, when we look at SDGs and migration, we have to think that migration and migrants contribute to and benefit from the global, the whole agenda. Indeed, this is a very important aspect. I said it before, it is universal, it is global in nature, and at the end of the day, by implementing the SDGs, you contribute to migration, you contribute to migrants, but also migrants and migration in more general terms is an important contribution to the achievement of the SDGs. Now, what we can see in particular is that over the 17 SDGs, 10 of them have targets that specifically talk about migration. And the most important, I would say, is target 10.7, that is under the SDG 10 on inequalities, that looks at promoting regular, safe, and well-managed migration. It is also from this specific SDG, we'll see it later, that this specific target that the Global Compact of Migration have been somehow built. But you can see that there is many other SDGs that have a direct link to migration, and we can mention also some specific targets. I think it's interesting to highlight on student mobility, on human trafficking, labor migration. That is is a really important issue highlighted in the SDGs. The migration governance target 10.7. There is also a lot of elements regarding remittances. We know that this is a big burden for migrants community when they want to support their host countries, and it's also creating a lot of issues when we look at the involvement of the diaspora in the development of their homelands. We have a great project that is actually going at the ICMPD level on diaspora facilities, and actually trying to look how we can better involve diaspora, migrants diaspora that are living in Europe, in supporting the sustainable development of their home countries. And last but not least, I would say, and that's a really important point, is migration data. Here we can data is fundamental. If we need to have reliable data. There is not enough data produced. The data that is existing is not reliable enough. And on migration, I would say it's even more important if we want to inform policies. And if we want policies that are based on evidences, that links a lot to what we have been saying a couple of weeks ago. And I'm quoting Julien Simon, our coordinator of the Mediterranean. If you want to change the narrative on migration, you also need to change the way policy on migration is done. And we shouldn't do the policy based on emotion, but based on evidences. And to have evidences, you also need data. So there is a highlight in the SDG agenda on migration data, and countries in particular are really pushed to develop and to have tools to be able to have better data on migration to inform their policies. Here, just an overview. I think I'm going short on time, but
you are. Before we go to the link between the city targeted actions and the SDGs, I just want to ask a question. And since you mentioned that SDGs are measurable, is there a monitoring and evaluation process to assess cities' contributions to SDGs?
Yes, indeed, there is. First of all, the SDGs are evaluated every year in the HLPF, the High Level Political Forum that gathers in New York. There is a system that has been set in place for countries to voluntarily report on the way they are achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Our colleague from UCLG has been doing, I think, a great work to try to have a local dimension of this assessment, even if some countries in particular do the effort to include the local level in their assessment. It's true that it is important to have also specific networks as UCLG that really make the point and have a global vision on how local authorities are implementing SDGs around the world. And since a couple of years, we have now also many cities that are doing their local voluntary reporting. And I think maybe Fatima Fernandez can tell us more about this later. I think that it's becoming more and more a habit for cities to do this report also from their side on how at the city level they're implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. I like to say that cities are just showcasing what they are already doing. We have to understand that the SDG, and come back to the first slide just a second, at the end of the day, it's nothing new, but it's a different way to look at things. So the idea of the 2030 agenda is really to do the things differently, to do them together, to connect them, and to have a common vocabulary. And I think that this is also something, and that's why I think from MC2CM we're trying to do also this effort to connect the targeted actions with the 2030 agenda, because it's a common vocabulary worldwide. You may have your generic objective, your specific objectives, your indicators, but at some point, if you want to give visibility to this, if you want to be able to benchmark it, to share it with others, using the 2030 agenda and the 17 SDGs and their targets is really a way to make it easy to communicate, because we all live in different frameworks, countries, and the things are not done the same way everywhere. But once you transform this and you align it with what is the SDG framework, it is very easy to share this information and to exchange it with and benchmark it with others.
So speaking of, yes, collective actions and how all of the initiatives are contributing to SDGs, how are the MC2CM targeted city actions contributing to those SDGs?
I think here it is very interesting. I said before that there is over the 17 SDGs, 10 of them have targets directly relating to migration. Sorry. And I think here you have an overview. That's all the targets that are being actually taken by the 15 targeted actions of MC2CM that are supported by MC2CM. And indeed, we are the projects, our partners that are implementing the actions around the Mediterranean sorry, are tackling 9 of these 10 SDGs. There is actions we can see on sustainable SDG 11 that are very relevant, actions on SDG 8, decent work, that are important. The partnership, just a second. The partnership aspect is very important, and I think that shows also we can see that there is four targets that are related to SDG 17, and that shows also how the action that cities are doing or that local stakeholders are doing when they work around migration needs partnership, needs the connection between the local level and the CSOs, needs the relation with the national level, needs the networks. So we can see here, that's an overview. We wish that in the future we'll be able to gather data, evidences. Sorry for the colleagues that are listening me coughing. I hope that will be our aim, is that in the future we will gather evidences of this contribution of the MC2CM targeted action to all these different SDGs and targets. And I will finish with this. I think our role as leaders of MC2CM is then to provide this information to our partners, UCLG and Habitat, that are really involved in the monitoring of the 2030 agenda, to be able to use it as an evidence of the contribution of cities to the SDGs, but also to the migration governance framework.
Thank you so much, Lamine. We wish we had more time to discuss this more into details, but we have to give the floor to Fatima. Fatima, since you're more into the SDGs and such global agendas, would you tell us more? Lamine, I think you can just move the slide. Yes, please. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Fatima, and thanks a lot, Lamine. I will take it from when Lamine left it, because I do think it is really important to recall and to highlight the relevance of not only having the actions aligned with SDGs in their goals, but also having that capacity to monitor. And in that regard, as my colleagues were already mentioning, next week we have the HLPF starting, where despite the circumstance this year, again, local governments do play an important role, and UCLG, together with the Global Task Force as a networks of local stakeholders, will have their local and regions forum, local governments and regional forum, and will participate actively in different parts of the official section. And among those events that we will be launching, one is really important to highlight. We will be launching together with UN Habitat, with our colleagues that unfortunately couldn't be here today with us, the guidelines for the voluntary local reports. So the voluntary national reports are made every year to report to the HLPF on how the SDGs are being implemented, and many local governments around the world are doing a great effort to also align with that way of monitoring and showcase what local governments do in order to achieve the global agendas. And in this, again, really important to highlight that, yes, we have the SDGs and we have the Global Compact on Migration, but the Global Compact on Migration is, of course, just one part, one compact in order to also help the achievement of the SDGs, and one is completely aligned with the other. And as Lamine was saying, indeed, the very title of the Global Compact for safe, regular, and orderly migration is the goal 10.7 of the SDGs on reducing inequalities. I just wanted again also to mention as well, again, recalling the extent to which many of the goals the SDGs are related to a good governance of migration and vice versa. So improving the governance of migration is already contributing to the SDGs, and contributing to the SDGs in many cases is probably contributing to a better governance of migration. So that being said, and if we can go to the next slide, it is important also to highlight that we have the Global Compact since the end of 2018, and that local governments have been doing a great effort to be counted in there. Of course, it was a state-led process, but local governments were heard, and of course, one of the bases of this Global Compact, which has 23 objectives under 5 thematic sections is that it promotes all along the agenda a whole of government approach and whole of society approach. This means that, again, this principle Lamin was mentioning on the fact that no stakeholder can be alone in achieving such goals applies perfectly for the Global Compact as well. So we cannot understand the Global Compact on Migration separately from the SDGs, the achievement of the SDGs. Now, again, the compact was approved in 2018, and it will be firstly reviewed in 2022. In the meantime, different agencies of the UN, together in the UN Migration Network, are working to help the implementation of this Global Compact. This is done mainly by helping states going through their own frameworks of governance and supporting them in the change of some legal frameworks, but also some practices that are not only related to the legal frameworks. And UCLG and also the Global Task Force are also part of this process in order to make sure that this process of implementation considers what is done by cities, because we do consider that it's not only that cities need to implement the Global Compact, but that states have a lot to learn on how cities implement it and how cities' actions contribute to that implementation. So I really want to insist on the importance of not only having these actions, but having them aligned to the global agendas and monitor them. Now, in this process of implementation and in the process of approval of the Global Compact, of course, there are still things where cities and us as city stakeholders feel that cities are not enough well represented, and their efforts sometimes go more unnoticed than they should. So it is important also to keep participating in fora where some of the aspects that are central to the governance of migration are discussed, because of course, and we can see that with the current circumstance, not only frameworks sometimes need to change and to adapt to circumstances, but there are circumstances that also request a further effort of dialogue and of agreement among the partners. Among these fora, one of the most important in terms of its contribution to the Global Compact implementation and to the process that is taking place mainly at the UN is the Global Forum on Migration and Development, which is an informal dialogue led by states that has already 12 years, whose main important feature is that it also includes other actors in the discussions. So many of the discussions fall within the Global Compact, but others also on different topics that arise throughout the years. Local governments have also a seat in one of the three mechanisms that are interlocutors of states in this process. So through the Mayors mechanism, which is steered by United Cities and local governments together with IOM and the Mayors Migration Council, what we try to ensure is that all along the dialogue, there are cities represented at all levels. So at mayoral level, but also at technical level, in order to exchange and promote their visions on the matter. Indeed, this year there's also a new particular aspect of this process, which usually has a major event, which is the summit once a year, and two preparatory events. This year there's also regional consultations, which try to also look more from a territorial approach, and that we welcome because this helps us also to have territorial scopes better represented. Many of the participants of the MC2CM project and some of our attendees today are already well aware of that process because they have been participating actively within it. We had the regional consultations in Africa starting last month, and we still have ongoing regional consultations. Today we are closing the consultation in the Americas, but we have as well consultations in Asia, in our countries, and in Europe ongoing. And with this, I really want to warmly invite you all, whoever is interested in this process, just write us through our MC2CM colleagues or directly to us, and we will be more than happy to accompany you in your engagement in this conversation. So we have seen cities like Sfax, Rabat, Sousse, and many others already participating very meaningfully, and we really expect that this continues all along the process.
Thank you, Fatima, but we are short in time. We are already 4 minutes beyond our time. But I have a question which says, how are the SDGs contributing to good governance of migration at the local level?
Yeah, well, as I was saying, there are many ways in which they are contributing, because of course, it is not only the SDG 10 which concerns migrants, but as we see, for instance, on policies towards the most vulnerable parts of the population, the SDG on poverty, but also the SDG on economic development, also the SDG on education. If we go through all the SDGs and we think of the fact that a good governance of migration is the one that makes that migration is an opportunity for everyone, and that no one is left behind in that process, we see that there are many ways in which contributing to one SDG means already that you're contributing to a better migration. But also, if you contribute to a better migration, of course, if migration works for all, it will work also for economic development, it will work also for social cohesion, for equality of opportunities, for gender equality, and for mainly the 10 SDGs that Lamin was mentioning.
Thank you so much. And this answers actually my question, which I wanted to ask, which is how can the cities benefit from working and aligning their initiatives within the framework of SDGs? One last thing, there is a question about how is UCLG contributing or cooperating with the IOM?
Well, so I will go to this last one. We already cooperate in the framework of the Majors mechanism, and IOM as the leader of, so to say, the whole governance of the UN Migration Network, and so the leading agency of the UN in the implementation of the Global Compact, comes in support of local governments for us to be able to promote also local approaches to that. Then, apart from the Majors mechanism, where we work together within the GFMD process, UCLG has a status of observer at the IOM since 2016. And again, the idea is that IOM doesn't only work with states and with a state vision, but also from the local level, trying to leverage and making sense and aligning all the efforts that are done by different cities in different parts of the world.
Thank you so much. I don't think anyone has any more questions, but if you would like to have a question afterwards, please send us your questions to MC2CM@icmpd.org, and we will address them privately to you. Thank you so much, Lamin, and thank you, Fatima. I think we are mainly on time because due to the technical and health challenges. So I will see you next week. We will have the city of Ramallah presenting their action, which will be very interesting because it is linked to also the SDGs, and they're linking their whole city strategy to the Sustainable Development Goals. Thanks to everyone who joined us today, and I will see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.